Ti has sentido al borde de tus fuerzas, como si el mundo entero estuviera en tu contra. Es un sentimiento más común de lo que creemos. Tal vez no lo compartimos a menudo, tal vez lo levamos en silencio. Pero esa carga pesada, esa sensación de estar en una lucha sin final, de alguna manera nos une. Es como si en algún punto de la vida todos enfrentamos ese momento oscuro, donde piensas que las puertas se cierran y el peso es tan abrumador que las fuerzas comienzan a faltar. Hoy quiero invitarte a un viaje especial. Even in the darkest moments, there is something prepared for us. I invite you to stay until the end to discover with me how this story can change the way we see our own tests. Because sometimes, in those moments of greater darkness, is when the light is closest. Let's talk about Anna, a woman whose story has been a symbol of hope and faith. A reflection of the silent struggle that many of us carry in our hearts. Anna was not just a woman who wanted to be a mother. In her context, motherhood defined a large part of her value and purpose to others. In the culture of her time, a woman without children was seen as incomplete, even as a shame for her family. Let's imagine what it meant for Anna to live day after day with the weight of that unfulfilled expectation, with that constant social and emotional pressure. However, for her, it was not only the public humiliation that hurt, but the personal emptiness of an unfulfilled dream, of a constant request that seemed to find no answer. Anna was not alone in this test. Although her husband loved her deeply and comforted her, her other wife, Penina, cruelly reminded her of her sterility. He humiliated her, provoked her, and made her wound even deeper. Every word and every mockery of Penina were like darts that penetrated deep into her spirit, reopening that wound over and over again. It was a test that went beyond the physical. It was a battle that was fought in her mind and in her heart. A daily struggle against pain, frustration, and despair. But this is where Anna gives us a great lesson. She did not allow this pain to destroy her. Instead of closing herself or bittering herself, she took her burden to God. Day after day, she went to the temple, and in the silence of her heart. The Bible tells us that Anna cried bitterly as she prayed, a type of prayer in which there are no reservations or appearances, only honesty and absolute surrender. Anna did something even more remarkable. She committed herself to God. She made him a vow, promising him that if he gave her a son, she would give him to the service of God for the rest of his life. This shows not only her desperation, but also her willingness to accept the divine plan, to submit her personal desires to something greater. She did not ask for a son just for herself. She was willing to give back to God what she longed. She not only asked for a miracle, she asked God to transform her in the process, to use her pain and her weight for something much greater than her own life. And after years of supplications and tears, God answered. Anna received her son, Samuel. But that moment was not only a happy closure for her. Samuel was consecrated to God and became a key figure in the history of Israel, a man who listened to the voice of God and guided his people. Anna's weight, her faith, and her unbreakable prayer not only changed her life, they impacted entire generations. The story of Anna invites us to reflect deeply. Sometimes we wonder why God takes so long to answer. Why does he allow us to face times of trial and silence? Anna teaches us that in those moments, God is working on something bigger. His time is not like ours, and his answers, although they may seem distant, arrive at the perfect moment to fulfill a higher purpose. When we pray, we approach God with that same humility and disposition. We are willing to open our hearts and accept his times and his ways, or we are only looking for our desires to be satisfied immediately. Prayer, as Anna shows us, is a place for meeting where God not only hears our requests, but also molds our character, refines our patience, and prepares us for what is reserved. Anna teaches us that although the road is long and the wait is difficult, prayer holds us and it keeps us. So, now we move on to the next story. After a great victory over the prophets of Baal, Elias, the powerful prophet, went through one of the darkest moments of his life. Imagine the scene. He had challenged hundreds of false prophets, and in front of all the people of Israel, God had shown his power by sending fire from heaven. It was a spectacular victory, one of those experiences that seemed to fill the heart of any person with faith, strength, and courage. But to the surprise of many, it was just after this great victory that Elias fell into an abyss of exhaustion and fear. Queen Jezebel, furious at what had happened, he threatened to kill Elias, and he, exhausted and terrified, fled to the desert. Elias, the same prophet who had just witnessed the power of God in such an evident way, felt that he could no longer do it. His spirit was so tired that he came to ask God to take his life. "Enough, Lord," he said, "take my life." This was not just any prophet, he was someone close to God. This was not just any prophet, he was someone close to God. The humanity of the prophets, of those we consider strong, untouchable. Even the people closest to God, those who seem unbreakable, have moments of extreme exhaustion and deep doubts. We are not alone in our struggles. Even Elias, with all his faith and experience, found himself at the edge of his strength. Sometimes we idealize the biblical characters, but here we see that they also faced limitations, weaknesses, and moments of despair. And if Elias was able to feel this kind of fatigue, how could we, who also carry daily loads, feel like this at certain moments in life? God, in his infinite wisdom, did not scold Elias, nor reprimanded him for his fatigue or for his doubts. On the contrary, he allowed him to rest. He sent an angel who provided him with food and allowed him to sleep. It was a simple act, but full of meaning. God showed Elias that rest is also part of the purpose, that pauses are necessary to continue. He did not ask him to resume his mission immediately. Instead, he gave him what he needed to regain strength. God respected his physical and emotional limitations, recognizing that even his most faithful servants need a time of rest and renewal. In this story, God teaches us a profound lesson. In our culture, we often value productivity and constant action, and we can feel guilty when we need to stop. But God shows us that rest is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. He reminds us that, in order to fulfill our mission and purpose, it is necessary to recognize our limitations and take care of ourselves. We cannot pretend to give our best if we are exhausted, and we should not be ashamed to acknowledge when we need a moment of pause. Elias' experience also invites us to stop and seek God's voice in those moments of exhaustion. Sometimes, in our tiredness, we can feel tempted to make hasty decisions, to give up or to surrender. But the story of Elias shows us that those moments are an opportunity to hear the voice of God, to find his direction and his comfort. After resting and being strengthened, Elias heard the voice of God in the whisper of a gentle breeze. A sign that even in the moments of greatest calm and apparent silence, God is present, guiding us and renewing our spirit. So in those days when fatigue seems to overcome us, and we feel we have no more strength, let us remember Elijah and the way in which God treated him. Let us learn to accept our need for rest and self-care without guilt and without shame. Recognizing our limitations is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that we understand our humanity and trust that God is with us, even in the moments of greatest fragility. He invites us to stop. Let us remember, a place for love to restore, a place to hear his voice before moving forward. Elijah reminds us that the time for spiritual renewal not only strengthens us, but also prepares us for our goal with new vision and renewed faith. When we let God restore us, we return with a stronger spirit and clarity that only he can give us. If this video has shocked you, I invite you to pause the video for a moment and write in the comments, "God, you are my strength," so that I and all here know that we are together on this path of faith and hope. The next story is that of Joseph of Egypt, one of the most profound and moving in the Bible. A story that shows us how perseverance and forgiveness they can transform even the darkest circumstances into paths of hope and purpose. From a young age, Jose faced a fate that seemed to be marked by suffering and injustice. He was his father's favorite son, which provoked the jealousy and hatred of his brothers. Those feelings of envy reached such a point that his own brothers, in an act of treason difficult to imagine, he was sold as a slave, and they pretended before his father that Jose had died. That young man, full of dreams and hopes, was torn from his home, from his family, and from the life he knew, and thrown into a world of slavery and loneliness. However, in every situation, Jose kept his principles, his values, and his faith. In the house of Potiphar, where he was sold as a slave, he not only fulfilled his work, but he did it with such evident dedication and loyalty that he quickly earned the trust of his master. But even there, life gave him more proof. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison, again without having done anything wrong. For many, this would have been the drop that filled the glass, a reason enough to lose all hope and be filled with bitterness. But Jose, despite the unfair circumstances, did not lose sight of who he was or who he trusted. Here, there is a profound lesson for us. Joseph teaches us that even in the valley of our lives, in those dark moments where it seems that everything is against us, we can still cling to our principles and maintain integrity. It is not easy, and sometimes everything around us seems to push us to surrender. But Joseph shows us that fidelity in small things is the key to success. Incluso en las adversidades, tiene un poder transformador. Él se distinguió por su compromiso y perseverancia, aun cuando parecía que nadie lo veía, aun cuando estaba en prisión. Jose comprendió que su valor he did not depend on his circumstances, but on his relationship with God and his willingness to live with integrity, regardless of what happened around him. The time in prison was long and difficult, but even there, Jose found a way to do good, to help others. He interpreted the dreams of his fellow inmates and their ability to listen and serve without expecting anything in return. It was what eventually led him to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. God used that moment, that silent preparation in the lowest places, to take him to the place where his purpose would be fulfilled. Finally, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, and the time came when he met face to face with his brothers, those who had sold him and betrayed him. At that moment, he had in his hands the opportunity to take revenge, to make them pay for all the suffering they had caused him. But instead of being filled with hatred or resentment, Joseph chose the path of forgiveness. He saw all the pain and injustice he had experienced as part of a greater purpose. He told his brothers, "You did not send me here, but God, to save lives." Joseph had come to understand that each trial, each suffering had been used by God for a greater good. And that understanding allowed him to forgive from the heart, freeing himself from any resentment. This type of forgiveness is not easy, and Jose challenges us to reflect on how we respond to the pain caused by others. We can see our trials as opportunities to grow, to forgive, and to find a greater purpose. The forgiveness of Joseph was a conscious decision to let go of the past, to see beyond the wounds, and to understand that, even in suffering, God was present and working. Forgiving does not mean justifying what they have done to us, but freeing us from our sins. Del peso del resentimiento y abrirnos a un futuro en el que el dolor ya no nos define en nuestra vida. Cada experiencia difícil, cada traición o injusticia puede convertirse en una oportunidad para ayudar a otros para redimir nuestras propias heridas. El perdón no solo beneficia a quien lo recibe, sino también a quien lo da. Es una herramienta de liberación emocional. Una manera de sanar y de seguir adelante sin que el pasado nos encadene. Finally, Jose shows us the power of perseverance. In his difficult times, his fidelity as a child was the key that prepared him for something much greater, a purpose that he could not even imagine. Sometimes we can also feel that we are in a dark place, in a valley of tests, and that our efforts seem to make no sense. But Joseph teaches us that our perseverance, our ability to remain firm in our faith and in our values, is what God can use to open doors to something greater. So when we find ourselves in those moments of difficulty, let us remember the story of Joseph. Let us remember that every test is a test. It can be a preparation, that forgiveness liberates us, and that perseverance, even in the most unjust situations, brings us closer to the purpose that God has for us. Here comes one of the most important parts of the video. The story of Job, one of the most challenging and moving narratives in the Bible. A story that confronts us with the deepest questions about suffering, faith, and purpose in the midst of adversity. Job was a just man, someone who lived an integral life, loved and respected, with a large family and abundant wealth. But in a sudden and devastating turn, Job lost everything. In a matter of days, his world crumbled. He lost his children, his possessions, his health, and even the understanding of his friends and wife. Suddenly, he found himself in an abyss of pain and desolation. Without answers, without apparent comfort. The end. Trying to understand why a just and kind God would allow such suffering. It is difficult to imagine the level of pain and confusion that Job experienced. With each loss, it seemed that his faith and hope were tested to the limit. In the midst of his despair, Job sat in ashes, covered in wounds, and began to question himself. Not just himself, but God. Why was this happening to him? What meaning could so much suffering have? However, despite the questions and his anguish, Job never stopped clinging to the idea that God was sovereign, that there was a justice beyond what he could understand. Job expressed his pain, his doubts, and his confusion, but he never lost his conviction that, in some way, God was present and acting. Here, Job's story faces a reality that we often try to avoid: the silence and the mystery of God. Job cried out for answers, but for a while he only found silence. And in that silence, Job had to face his own limitation, the impossibility of fully understanding the ways of God. But despite this silence, his faith did not weaken. He questioned, yes, and expressed his pain, but he never gave up his trust in divine justice. The end. This is a profound lesson for us. Many times, in the midst of our trials, we seek explanations, immediate answers, and when we do not find them, we feel tempted to think that God no está allí o que se ha olvidado de nosotros. Sin embargo, la historia de Job nos recuerda que la ausencia de respuestas no significa la ausencia de Dios. El ejemplo de Job nos lleva a una reflexión poderosa sobre la naturaleza de la fe. His faith was not based on the understanding of the divine plans, but on an unbreakable trust, even when everything seemed dark and meaningless. Job teaches us that true faith does not always need answers. It is a faith that knows how to accept the mystery, that acknowledges that God's ways are greater than ours, and that, even if we do not understand the purpose of our pain, we can trust that He has a purpose, one that sometimes escapes our sight. This kind of faith is a faith without conditions, one that does not expect immediate results or tangible rewards, but surrenders itself to the greatness of God. Job accepted that, although he did not understand the reason for his suffering, God was still worthy of his worship and trust. His relationship with God, God's love, it didn't depend on material blessings or physical well-being. It was a pure faith, a total surrender to a God whom he knew was just. Although I could not see the justice in that moment, and this acceptance of the mystery of God is something that challenges our understanding. It invites us to give up the need to control or understand every detail of our lives, and instead embrace the uncertainty with the certainty that God sustains us, even when we cannot see the immediate purpose. For us, this story is an invitation to acceptance. Job teaches us to embrace pain, not to run away from it or try to hide it, but to integrate it as part of our human and spiritual experience. In that pain, God is present, and in the midst of our tears, God is with us. God never explained to Job the reason for his trials. He simply showed him his greatness. And Job could see that even in suffering, God was orchestrating something much greater. Job's story invites us to reflect. We are willing to trust in God, even when we do not understand His ways. We can accept the mystery of His will and recognize that, although our evidence may seem incomprehensible to us, God always acts with a purpose. In those moments of darkness and silence, Job's story reminds us that our faith can be unbreakable, that we can rest in the fact that God is with us, supporting us and working in our favor. Accepting pain and uncertainty is not easy, but in this surrender, God transforms us, shapes us, and allows us to grow in ways we would never have imagined. Job's faith, an unbreakable faith, inspires us to move forward, knowing that, although we do not have all the answers, we have God who is the answer itself. And with that certainty, we can face any test, trusting that, in the end, its purpose will be revealed in our lives. Throughout these stories, we have seen how characters like Anna, Elias, Hosea, and Job faced difficult tests, each of them going through their own struggles and challenges. Anna showed us the power of a sincere and humble prayer, one that opens their heart to God without reserve, with the confidence that, even though his response is late, he hears and acts at his due time. Elijah, in his turn, taught us the importance of acknowledging our limitations and embracing rest and self-care, reminding us that even in our tiredness, God supports us and gives us what's necessary to move forward. Hosea inspires us with his example of forgiveness and perseverance. It shows that even the most painful experiences can become opportunities to help others and fulfill a greater purpose. And Job, in his unbreakable faith in adversity, reminds us that even if we do not understand our proofs and the silence of God is difficult to accept, nuestra confianza puede descansar en el que es justo y soberano, aun cuando sus caminos nos resulten un misterio. These stories are a reminder that God always walks with us, even in the darkest moments. The strength does not come from our own ability, but from trusting Him, from giving Him our struggles and accepting that His plans, although we do not understand them now, they have a greater purpose. I want to encourage you to share this video with those who need to hear these words, who need a reminder of hope and strength. Leave your comments with your reflections, your experiences, or the stories that have also inspired you so that together we can continue to learn and support each other on this path of faith. If you were one of the few faithful who made it to the end of the video, write in the comments, "God, my hope is in you," so that we can all see that we are still together on this path of faith. For joining us on this journey, for these stories of resilience and faith. Each one of them shows us that, even though the tests are hard, we are never alone. God walks by our side, giving us the strength and the courage to overcome any adversity. Remember, He never gives us a burden without also giving us the strength to overcome it. So when you feel that the weight is too much, trust that God is with you.